you're involved with a breach of contract lawsuit, can you collect your attorney's fees? My name is Andrew Ayers. I'm a business lawyer with offices in Edina, Minnesota and New York. And today we're going to talk about a really common question I get from my business clients, which is, if I'm in this lawsuit because somebody breached a contract, do I have to pay all of my attorney's fees, or does the other side have to pay? Now, depending upon the nature of your business, this can be a really important question for you to decide whether or not you even want to file that lawsuit. So for example, if you're owed less than $25,000, this question is important because your legal fees can easily go well beyond what you're owed. If you have to go to a smaller court of jurisdiction, one with $25,000 or less, and you have to litigate your debt all the way through the end of a trial, your legal fees could be $35,000, $40,000 on a debt that's maybe only $10,000 to $15,000. So before you go down that road of making that lawsuit, you may want to consider, are there alternative ways for you to settle your matter? However, if you're going to do the lawsuit, or if you're already in the lawsuit and you're wondering, are these attorney's fees going to be available to me? The first place you look, especially in a breach of contract case, is, does the contract say that you get your attorney's fees? Second, you're only going to get them if the contract says so and you win the case. And of course, the third part is, does the court find them to be reasonable? So again, going back to our example of, let's say, a debt of $15,000, even if your contract says you get attorney's fees, if the debt is $15,000 and your attorney's fees are $250,000, there's a good chance the court will find that's not a reasonable amount of counsel fees involved for this case, and they may reduce that award, in which case you're still paying for part of your attorney's fees. To solve this ahead of time, what you want to do is make sure your contracts have an attorney fee provision, and you want to be sure that you know what it says and when it can be invoked. So an attorney fees provision is something that says when one party doesn't perform under a contract, the other party can be responsible for their attorney fees. So for example, there's two ways we can look at these. First, it can be one party gets all of their attorney's fees regardless of the outcome of any dispute. Or the second, which is more common, is the prevailing party, the winning party in the lawsuit, is entitled to their counsel fees, and we submit them to the judge to find out how much those should be. Your attorney fee provision can also include things like settlement costs. So if there's going to be costs with the settlement, would they be covered? Are there going to be expert witnesses? So a lot of people, if a case has to go to trial and it's a more complex contract, you may need an expert witness. Does it include appeals? Let's say even though you win the first round at the lower court level, if you're now up on appeal, does the other party still have to pay for those legal fees? Are there collection costs? So if you don't actually have to file a lawsuit, but maybe you just have to hire an attorney to help you collect that money, are those fees included as part of your attorney's fees provision? And finally, and most importantly, what does a win mean? So just saying that a prevailing party is going to be entitled to counsel fees doesn't always get you where you want to be. So let's say you have a breach of contract case and you've had to sue somebody who owes you money, and before you get to trial, you settle the case. And maybe they owe you some money but not all. Is that considered a win? So this is why it's important that the provision specifies what does a win really look like. Because you may go into the breach of contract lawsuit, you have your attorney fee provision, you're ready to go, and then you settle it, and you think you're getting your attorney's fees, but now you've got a whole second issue of the other side saying you didn't really win. We settled this case, so I'm not going to pay your counsel fees. Now, the other situation you run into is if you have a breach of contract case and you have to sue somebody, but you don't have this provision in your contract, then what are you going to do? Well, if there's no provision in the contract, there's no presumption that you can even get your attorney's fees. But there are two ways you may still be able to receive them. The first way is if there's some kind of statute that relates to your cause of action that says that the prevailing party or a party who brings a cause of action under that statute is entitled to their counsel fees. And then the second way is if there's really egregious conduct. The other side has done really bad things, so bad that the judge says, wait a second, you know what? This goes well beyond the contract. I think the other party should be awarded counsel fees, or your party should be awarded counsel fees. So you want to look at those options, but really the safest bet is to make sure that in your contracts you have a provision that addresses whether or not attorney's fees are going to be available if there's a breach of contract. And this clause doesn't have to actually say that everybody gets their attorney's fees or only one party gets them. It can actually say nobody gets them. So we understand going into this contract that no matter what happens, if there's a breach, neither party is entitled to attorney's fees. Now, we've talked a lot about your contract today, and specifically your attorney's fees provision. And this is not something that you want to necessarily try to do yourself. As you'll probably see from looking through these issues, you want to make sure that language is correct. You may try to draft something yourself and just say the winner gets counsel fees, but how do we know what a win means? How do we know who gets what? So instead of trying to do this yourself, the smarter way is let's work with professionals who do this for a living. We can craft a contract that works for you and your business. So if you have questions on your contract, or if you're ready to get started, you can go to my website, andrewmayers.com. There's a red button that takes you to my personal calendar. It says Legal Strategy Session. We can have a 15 or 20 minute phone call and go through all of these options for you and make sure your contract has the right attorney's fees provision so that you can avoid having this uncertainty if you have to file a breach of contract lawsuit.